I've seen a lot of people speculating whether a Chinese memory maker would step up and increase supply to take advantage of the current memory situation and actually potentially then bring prices down by increasing supply, because currently there's a big supply-demand imbalance while AI data centers are demanding massive amount of memory and the suppliers aren't looking to invest huge amounts of capital in building out new fabs. Except that seems to be what Chinese memory maker CXMT is now preparing to do. So CXMT, or Chongqing Memory Technologies, I may have mispronounced that, I'm trying my best here, does actually look to be targeting increasing production in order to take advantage of the current pricing, etc. And my understanding is that they're currently the world's fourth largest memory supplier. However, this whole thing is a little bit complicated. So to kind of summarize the fast version of it and get to some of the other stories we have to cover today, because there is definitely some more interesting stuff, I'll basically say it like this. So any expansion to production capacity takes a considerable amount of time, whether that's building out new fabs or upgrading current lines in order to produce the types of memory that are being used here. So if this does end up helping in the supply-demand imbalance, it's not going to be immediate. So don't expect this to help prices right now. But in the medium to long term, this could potentially help with the supply-demand situation. Now, that being said, it's also a little bit more complicated because, well, I'm not an expert on this aspect of the situation. I've seen some people saying like these are on like an entity list, so could they even sell in like certain markets like the United States? And while I'm not an expert on who's on what entity list and all of that, I would say that my take is that no matter whether they can actually supply memory into all regions, it would still help the overall supply-demand situation. Because even if they were only able to increase supply in China, for example, and I'm not saying they would just be limited to that, but even if that was the case, then that would be still supplying something. And this is a worldwide, situation where DRAM supply is short. So even if you start to meet supply in one region, then that can help reduce demand elsewhere. Since we're looking at a limited supply of a certain resource, I think this would in general help overall. But again, I think the bigger issue is just the time frame for this being able to help. But I certainly don't think this is a bad thing from the perspective of PC gamers wanting supply to get better. But again, I think it's more medium to long term that this would make any sort of difference. I'm finding this at a Tom's Hardware article. All my sources for the news today will be in the video description. Now, in the near term, it's certainly looking like DRAM contract prices are going to continue increasing. Things are going to get worse, not better, at least in the near quarter. And then there's always the question over, will there at some point be some big collapse in AI data centers? Everybody's kind of waiting for that bubble to pop. But the reality is nobody can tell you when or if that exactly will happen. So at least for now, it's looking like things will be getting worse, not better. And, maybe demand will go down in the future. Maybe supply will increase in the future. But as for now, things aren't looking great, which makes it especially frustrating when you finally get a decent deal on some RAM and the company cancels the order and then tries to make it up to you by offering expired coupon codes. And yes, I say coupon, not coupon. I know you guys love my pronunciation of certain words. Anyway, so this story blew up. Now, to be clear, it looks like now Corsair has at least corrected the expired coupon code and has offered a better one that's RAM specific as well. It's unclear whether they would have done that if this hadn't blown up and given them a lot of feedback. So I think it's important for people to try to make it public when companies are screwing you over, so that then the word can get out there and the situation will improve. It puts heat on the companies to improve improve things and make things right, or at least better. So basically what happened is that Corsair had posted actually a decent deal on some RAM. I mean, decent for the current situation, but then the orders were getting canceled, and customer service was offering a coupon code to make that up to people, while it was only a 15% discount, and also it had expired as of October 31st, based on the screenshots that I was seeing here. I mean, take a look at this. As a gesture of goodwill and to thank you for your understanding, we would like to offer you 15% off your next order. Please use the following voucher code, valid through October 31st, 2025 at checkout. Oh, now, hopefully this was just an honest mistake by customer service, but it certainly looks pretty bad. But I've seen other articles updated here. Again, all my sources will be in the video description, reporting that Corsair has replied on X to explain their side of the situation and mention that they have offered an additional coupon for DRAM specifically. And I'm seeing reports in the comments that those are 40% discounts, which, while still not bringing RAM prices down to what they used to be, is at least giving people a better RAM price than what other people are getting right now. It's certainly better than the slap in the face that is a 15% discount code that you can't even use because it's expired. But anyway, still unfortunate to see the orders canceled. Corsair is claiming that it was an internal systems error and the item briefly appeared available for pre-order despite not actually being in stock. Again, what companies claim and what is actually the case, who knows? Because Corsair is also dealing with another situation where a user reportedly ordered a $3,500 gaming PC and then had their order canceled, and then the item relisted at an $800 higher price of $4,300. Now, again, Corsair has, again, after seeing this backlash blow up online, because again, this was made public on, I think this one was on Reddit, Corsair's side of the story is that they've been made aware of a customer who placed an order for a Vengeance A5100 gaming PC on our web store on December 31st. The order was flagged by our fraud detection system and was canceled as a result. On January 1st, our holiday deals promo pricing ended and the normal pricing was reinstated. We are in contact with this customer directly to let them know we will still honor the price and make sure their order is not flagged once again. So their side of the story is that it at least wasn't malicious or intentional to cancel the order just to raise it $800, and that the raising of $800 was due to the holiday deals expiring on January 1st. This does kind of make sense that this one was not malicious. However, I'm guessing it helped that things blew up online to get them to get in contact with the customer directly to let them know they will honor the original price, because it seems like the customer may have just been out of luck if this hadn't blown up and gotten addressed kind of individually due to the backlash that they were getting online. So again, another reason to make sure that if customers are screwing you over, try to get it out there, and sometimes you can pressure them into making the situation better. Anyway, now in this whole RAM apocalypse situation, one kind of interesting note is that it looks like older AM4 platform motherboards are starting to get more production fired up, which is kind of interesting. It looks like the latest report is that Gigabyte is releasing 4 new AMD socket AM4 motherboards. Now, when I read into this, it looks like these are really more new revisions of old models, not necessarily completely new models. But either way, it looks like we're seeing more AM4 platform boards, which use DDR4 memory rather than DDR5 memory, kind of spinning up again. There's more interest in them just because if, from a price to performance standpoint, buying into an older platform didn't used to necessarily make a ton of sense. But if DDR5 prices shoot up way faster than DDR4 prices, it could start to tip the value proposition for gaming builds back in favor of AM4. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but it's certainly something to keep your eye on based on current pricing. And with that in mind, you might want to take a look at the this hardware unboxed video from a couple of days ago. The real fine wine strikes again, Ryzen 5600X, 5700X, and 5800 XT revisit. Now, this is interesting because that's kind of the look is fresh benchmark data on these AM4-based CPUs, not the 5800X 3D, which is seeming to be out of production and so very expensive, or at least because it's the highest end CPU that you can stick on those boards, it's very expensive. But the 5600X, 5700X, 5800XT, not necessarily as ridiculously priced. Now, I'll leave it to you guys to watch the updated benchmarks, but I will say it is interesting because they also look at it against Intel CPUs like the 12400F on both DDR4 and DDR5 based systems, if you're kind of considering that route instead. And one interesting thing that's kind of uncovered in this video and discussed is that since the original 5000 series CPU reviews came out, the AMD processors are performing better than they used to relative to the Intel processors. And Steve is suggesting here and provides some evidence that this is the case, that it's that there was a Windows 11 update at a certain point that increased performance in games on Ryzen CPUs, including the Ryzen 5000 series CPUs, but did not have as noticeable of a performance increase on Intel, kind of shifting the balance on the performance you would have seen in the launch reviews for these AMD versus Intel processors. So it's really cool to get this updated testing on that. So I'd recommend taking a look, because what you'll see here, and I test out the Ryzen 5600X in a lot of the newest game releases, because when I test out new games, I like to test out how they do on not just a variety of GPUs, but even going back to an older but still pretty usable CPU like the 5600X. And it is, for the most part, it is completely usable in every game. As far as not always being over 60 FPS at certain settings and CPU-intensive areas of certain games, but is overall a very usable CPU. And this also gives you a chance to look at how do the lower core count version do against like the 8-core versions, and again, spoilers, still hangs in there pretty well. So if you are one of the people considering going that AM4 route due to the RAM pricing situation, this is a highly recommended video. And again, I do have all my sources linked in the video description. Now, on the GPU side of things, with this memory situation, we've been seeing a lot of reports that we're expecting the pricing to go up, but there's also been some rumblings that supply might be decreased, at least potentially from Nvidia. Now, we're still not at a point where we can absolutely confirm that that's 100% happening, but this is starting to get into at least some hard evidence for a particular distributor in Germany. So there's a retail store posting a conversation with their distributor that they buy their Nvidia GPUs from, indicating that at least that distributor in this region is having trouble getting supply of the higher end Nvidia GPUs. Here's the actual email screenshot that this retailer has made public. Again, this is from their distributor that the store buys their GPU supply from. It says, "Hello, due to the current market situation, we are only able to supply graphics cards in a limited capacity. At this time, you can order up to 5 units per model for those with a 5070 chip. Unfortunately, we are currently unable to sell any cards for the 5070 Ti, 5080, and 5090 models. This applies to both existing orders as well as any orders placed after December 30th. We will consolidate all current orders and provide you with an updated overview shortly. We appreciate your understanding and apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. Kind regards." Anyway, so again, I haven't seen signs of massive shortages on these cards at this time. But again, if this is something that's kind of coming down the pipeline, I don't know. We haven't seen signs of this being more broad than this particular distributor. But that certainly doesn't sound great. So again, something to keep our eye on as we see how much the current situation starts to affect GPU pricing. Hopefully things don't get too ridiculous, but they might. Now, if Nvidia does start reducing its GPU supply, there is some question over whether AMD could take advantage of that to increase their market share. Now, we've certainly seen leaks behind the scenes pointing to AMD at least raising pricing, although that's not necessarily the same thing as reducing supply. We interestingly have a report that AMD claims to capture 25% of the GPU market in China. Now, I found this at videocards.com, but it looks like they're getting their source from My Drivers, which tends to have some inside information on the China region of, PC hardware. So anyway, they're saying reports from China that say that AMD has completed a sales structure change for its consumer graphics business in the country. The report suggests GPU channel oversight is now handled under the same leadership that manages AMD's CPU sales locally. So basically, there's a whole change to the way AMD is handling their sales in that region, looking like instead of having a separate, person and segment in charge of GPU sales and CPU sales, it looks like they're consolidating that under the one who has currently been handling CPU sales and have been giving increased sales targets and apparently a goal for 25% of the GPU market in China. Now, traditionally, as far as I've understood it, the Chinese region has been very much more NVIDIA dominated, although it's hard to get specific numbers on that. Now, speaking of market share and specific numbers, AMD, NVIDIA, etc., we do have the latest Steam hardware survey. And one interesting thing to note is that the 9070 has finally shown up for the first time in the main list at 0.22%. Now, remember, that's not market share of current sales. That is the percentage of people who were surveyed this particular month on Steam that had this particular, their percentage of this particular survey. Now, that being said, I want to say that I think something went wrong with this particular month's Steam hardware survey, and let me give you a few pieces of evidence to explain why I think something is significantly wrong with this month. And by the way, I'm not saying it's wrong so the 9070 doesn't even have that much. I'm just saying something is wrong with the data set. Notice, for example, that they're saying DirectX 12 GPUs have increased from the around 90% that they've been hanging out at up to 131.44%, which is a over 40% increase and is going beyond 100% of the GPUs in the survey, which I don't understand how they're calculating the percentage to go over 100%. That doesn't seem to make sense because this isn't a percentage increase. They're saying that over 100% of the GPUs surveyed this month were DirectX 12 GPUs. So in this case, it doesn't make sense to me that anything could go over 100% in this type of a survey. They're also showing that DirectX 8 GPUs and below have decreased from 8% to negative 32.39%. I don't understand what a negative percentage here would indicate other than that however they're calculating this is broken. Also, when you're looking at the month-to-month change in this type of a survey, the type of dramatic changes that we're seeing here seem too much. It doesn't seem realistic. And also, there's other severe changes, again, beyond what would make a lot of sense. Like when you look at the language survey, it's gone from simplified Chinese being 22% to a 2% reduction. There's been a 2% reduction in the simplified Chinese, which seems pretty dramatic. In general, I'm just noticing that something seems a little bit off here with this particular month. So anyway, it is interesting to see the 9070s increasing enough to show up on the survey. But something about this particular month seems off, at least with how they're calculating the percentage of DX12 GPUs. So anyway, just, something to keep an eye on when you're interpreting this month's Steam hardware survey. Something seems off. Now, a different Steam survey is their Steam Awards, which I think we could touch on since this is PC gaming related channel, the game of the year. And again, how do they calculate this? This is actually just voted on by Steam users. So it's really just a popularity contest. But that's fine. It's showing the result of the popularity contest on Steam. So the Game of the Year award has gone to Hollow Knight Silksong, which I have not personally played. A lot of people, when I was ranking the games I played in 2025, asked me, where is Hollow Knight Silksong? And I was clear that I was ranking games that I had played. Now, the reason I haven't played Silksong is because I tried playing the original Hollow Knight a number of times over the years since it was released. I've jumped into it a few times. I always get an hour or so in and I just am bored and lose interest. I've heard that the game gets much better after you put a bit more time into it, but for whatever reason, I just keep bouncing off the original, so I also haven't bought the second one. Maybe I'll get around to it at some point. I completely respect the game, and I'm certain that Hollow Knight Silksong is an excellent game, and so it's cool to see it get Game of the Year here. The VR Game of the Year award has gone to The Midnight Walk. I'll be honest, I haven't owned a VR headset for a number of years now. Basically, the last time I got into it was to play Half-Life Alyx, and then I sold my headset shortly afterwards to buy more GPUs for my channel, because this was back before I was getting review samples or anything like that, so I had to fund my own GPU purchases to review them and all of that, so that's why I haven't had a VR headset. Just sold it to help me buy GPUs for the channel, and I do have the money to buy one now, and I probably at some point will, but at this point I'm kind of looking towards the Steam frame once that comes out as my next jump back into VR. Labor of Love Award has gone to Baldur's Gate 3. This award is talking about a game that just keeps getting updates. Now, this feels like a weird choice here, other than remember this is a popularity contest, not because I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 is an amazing game, but I feel like there's other games that are maybe getting bigger updates over time, to my knowledge. Although I will say that Baldur's Gate 3 did get a Linux native version that is interesting and has certainly improved performance on the Steam Deck. So it is certainly getting updates and things years after release, which is good. I just wonder if there's other games that are actually getting more content updates that maybe would have made more sense here. But again, moving on, Best Game on the Steam Deck Award, I think Hades 2 is an excellent choice. That is certainly one of my favorite games of the year, and it's absolutely phenomenal on the Steam Deck. Better with Friends Award goes to Peak. I have not really got into this. It certainly looked interesting, but again, more as a social experience. And as I've lamented in my recent talk of my favorite games of the year, playing online with friends when you're as old as I am is a little more difficult, as people are generally have kids and the times were available, etc. To all link up and play at the same time is certainly much harder to arrange. The Outstanding Visual Style Award went to Silent Hill F. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure I really agree with that one, but when I looked at the other finalists, I'm also not sure I think any of these really stand out for a visual style to me, so okay, fine, sure, whatever. Most Innovative Gameplay Award went to Ark Raiders, which, again, as I talked about, is not the type of game I'm particularly interested in. Again, online stuff, it really didn't grab me with the extraction shooter format, etc. But I completely respect what the game's doing, and it does seem to be a very interesting innovation in that style of gameplay, and the concurrent player numbers on Steam, etc., certainly show that it makes a lot of sense there. Best Game You Suck At Award went to Hollow Knight Silksong, so good game that is also difficult to play. And Best Soundtrack Award did go to Clair Obscur Expedition 33, so Expedition 33 was not completely shut out of the Steam Awards. And it does have an amazing soundtrack, so this is one that I think completely makes sense. Outstanding Story-Rich Game Award went to Dispatch, which I have not played and don't really know anything about, to be 100% honest. And Sit Back and Relax Award went to Are We There Yet, which I also don't really know anything about, but that's certainly an interesting title. Anyway, so that is our Steam Award winners for the year. Now, for another kind of Steam-related note, the Legion Go 2 now has a listing. This is sourced from Lenovo China, mentioning SteamOS. Now, this would be a very interesting SteamOS handheld, but also the asterisks by SteamOS and the Xbox FSE asterisks seem to be indicating that there would be a one-button switch to Windows Xbox FSE. So if this is what it sounds like, this could be an extremely interesting PC handheld, because there's a lot of debate about SteamOS versus Windows, especially now that Windows is getting its full screen experience version that is trying to make things better for a gaming, especially handheld specific kind of front end for the Windows experience that also has some memory optimizations to help for performance. But in a lot of ways, SteamOS is still just a more natural, almost console-like experience for a handheld gaming device. Now, my preference has certainly been for SteamOS, but there are occasions where I'm a little bit annoyed with my Steam Deck, where it's like, what if I wanted to play Battlefield 6, which has kernel-level anti-cheat, that kind of a thing. It would be nice to have, a Windows option there. Now, of course, you can install Windows yourself and dual boot things, but that is a lot of hassle. So having a handheld console, handheld gaming PC that has a switch to toggle between a dual install that is already there from the store, if that's what this really is, this is then extremely interesting, especially because the hardware specs here is also much better than what we were previously getting from the Legion Go S, which did have a SteamOS version, but to my knowledge did not just have a toggle switch for which one you're booting into. So the Legion Go S, again, a SteamOS device, had a Ryzen Z1 Extreme, which features a 12 compute unit version of the graphics from AMD, whereas the Legion Go 2 is looking to be a Z2 Extreme, which can be 16 compute units. So this could be interesting. Also, looks like it's going to be an OLED display rather than a IPS display like the Legion Go S was. So this is interesting. Now, it looks like a 1920 by 1200 144 hertz OLED panel. I'm curious if it's been confirmed whether that's variable refresh rate at this point, because one issue I've seen with a lot of the OLED panels on these handhelds has been like the OLED Steam Deck, for example. They haven't been variable refresh rate. So, man, if they had a variable refresh rate OLED panel on here, this would probably be something I would actually buy for my own personal use. Now, we'll see, but overall, this looks very, very interesting. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is more just on game optimization standpoint. How about hitting 30 FPS via frame generation being an actual performance target for a game? This seems absolutely insane to me. This is coming out of an interview with the developers for Ark Survival Ascended, talking about some of their efforts to improve performance, but also to get it to a point where it can run on Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I haven't actually tested out Ark Survival Ascended, but I've seen comments on my channel talking about when I say like the worst optimized game I've ever tested, they're like, that's because you haven't tested out Ark Survival Ascended yet. So maybe I need to take a look at Ark and what its optimization looks like. It's an Unreal Engine 5 game. Now, the good news here is that the developers are talking about their work on porting it to Unreal Engine 5.7, which is a much newer version of Unreal Engine 5. which they're saying offers a significant performance improvement. They're talking about in GPU limited scenarios on the Switch 2, I think they're referencing specifically an increase of like 40%. They're saying about 33 to 40% on those GPU limited scenes. Just by updating to Unreal Engine 5.7, and they're saying that it looks like a lot of these performance improvements would show up on multiple platforms, the other consoles, PC, etc. So it's looking like there is potentially a significant performance improvement in the works by just that move to Unreal Engine 5.7. However, this is where things get scary as far as the worst fears about frame generation being used in place of game optimization that, oh my goodness. Let's just take a look at what they're saying. So right now, just to be quite frank, it's referring to the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the Ark Survival Ascended that they have up and running right now. They're saying it's around 20 or so FPS even after the Unreal Engine 5.7 update. So how do we get to a 30 plus FPS frame rate? We're about to try experimenting with frame generation. But the truth is, I honestly don't know the results on that yet because it's not inherently something we can just turn on. So now they have an interesting discussion about trying to get frame generation running on the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware. They talk about asking Nvidia if it's possible to get Nvidia's frame generation working on the Switch 2. And the answer seemed to be more along the lines of not at this time, which isn't a hard no, which is in and of itself interesting because the Switch 2 is not based on GPU hardware that on the PC space would support Nvidia's frame generation because it's based on like 30 series type hardware, not 40 series or up hardware. So that's interesting that they didn't get a complete just no from Nvidia, but it was certainly a no, at least for now, which might just continue to be a no. So they're more interested in trying to get AMD's frame interpolation working. But they basically say that there's not a Nintendo Switch 2 version of it available, so they'd have to work on porting that themselves. So that's certainly just interesting in and of itself. But to be clear, they're just looking at using frame generation to push frame rates over 30 FPS after frame generation, not going from 30 to 60 with frame generation, which in my opinion is already kind of terrible. But they're looking to use frame generation just to get over 30 FPS from a base of around 20 to 25. He says, again, this is the developer for the game, says, let me be frank, I'd rather have 30 FPS frame rate without frame interpolation. But if I can get to 20 to 25 without frame interpolation, then use frame interpolation to push it over 30 solidly, I think that'll feel good enough. And I would like to argue that it would not. No, it would not. It would not be good enough. 20 FPS base for frame generation is not good enough. I don't think it'll look too smeary or too laggy, he says, if we're close to 30 without it. The reality is we're getting there. It's looking good and it's progressing, so I hope it's going to happen and be released this year and is impressive. Guys, I do not want to live in a world where game developers think that hitting 20 to 25 FPS and then kicking on frame generation to get it over 30 is a good enough experience. That is not good enough. Get your game running above 30 FPS without frame generation. This is a complete abuse of that technology. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about a 30 FPS after frame generation is enabled target as being good enough for game optimization. Because I'm certain I'm not out on a limb here saying that I don't feel like that's good enough, guys. Anyway, I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and you all have an excellent day.